brings a wealth of experience that she's going to share just a taste of today. So Naomi, for those of you who don't know, is the Together Liverpool Food Insecurity Lead Executive. She's also the Network Coordinator of Feeding Liverpool and a Senior Researcher at Church Army. Her experience prior to that, or in addition to that really, is as an independent researcher with Rooted Research, where she has done research for different organisations and charities, including the Church of England and the Children's Society. And Naomi's PhD was from Newcastle University, where she undertook participatory research with young people in the northeast of England on youth participation and activism. There's so much more that I could say about what Naomi's done, but instead I am going to pass over to Naomi straight away. So over to you, Naomi, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stephanie, and everyone else from the Life on the Breadline. I want to use our final session of the day, and I know for some of you this will be your first session, and for others you've journeyed without this conference throughout the day. But I want to use it to think about how we can respond to the Life on the Breadline project that's been going for the last 3 years, and in particular how we can respond to some of their main themes around poverty, austerity and faith. As part of getting us to think about our response, I'm going to share briefly about how my life intersects along some of these main themes. Stephanie did a great job at introducing me. I work for Together Liverpool and their food insecurity lead. So I support churches across the Diocese of Liverpool who are thinking about how they can tackle food insecurity in their areas. Stephanie also mentioned that I've been a researcher for a while. So the last 11 years I've spent doing various research projects across the UK. These have involved research around food banks, funeral poverty, mission and discipleship. And as Stephanie mentioned, my PhD was in youth participation. There's other aspects to me other than my work. I'm also a volunteer at St George's Pantry. St George's is the church that my husband is a vicar of. It's a Church of England church. So I'm a volunteer and I'm a member of that pantry. As part of my role with Feeding Liverpool, I also help coordinate some of the pantry rollout across Liverpool and across some of the wider area. And I've recently done some national research about the Your Local Pantry franchise, which I'll speak a little bit about later on. So I'm a clergy spouse. I live in Everton. Everton is in Liverpool city itself, so fitting very well with the Life on the Breadline focus on urban cities. We're a community that I'm very blessed to be a part of. There is so much I love about living here. We don't do very well on some of the kind of government statistics. As a parish, we're the 14th most deprived parish out of the 12,000 Church of England parishes in the UK. I'm also a mum of 2 boys. I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I'm involved fully in life in this community. So firstly, thinking about the Life on the Breadline project, I want to say thank you. I found it a very moving and effective project to be a part of. In particular, I'd love to encourage you to go look at their austerity timeline, the way that pieces together the impacts of austerity and the changes we've seen in our communities over the last 10, 12, 13 years. I've also found the central question: if austerity kills, can the church's responses give life? And Chris Shanahan's description of poverty as violence, you can hear his talk about that on the website. There are particular things from the Life on the Breadline research that have given me pause to reflect, but also given me a new language with which to express some of my work. There's a podcast on the website with Stephanie and Chris, and they're asked in it about the findings of the project that surprised them. And one of the things Chris said was, given the impact of austerity policies have had on marginalised communities, he expected to encounter greater levels of anger from Christians. If you can hold some of those questions that I put on the screen in your head as I go through this presentation, such as, are you angry about the violence, poverty, and in what ways have you responded and acted with this anger? I want to use my time today to share 3 different moments when I've been part of something that has developed out of a response towards the violence of poverty. I share these 3 examples not because we've always got it right here, certainly not. I hope I can share some of the things I've learnt, some of the moments where it hasn't been as smooth. But also, as you listen, what I'd love to encourage you to do is be thinking about the moments when you've responded to violence, the violence of poverty, and how you'll respond to what you've been learning through the Life on the Breadline. So leading into my first example of response, I want to begin by grounding some of what we've heard today in the lives of people who are experiencing poverty. It isn't my daily reality. I grew up in rural Scotland. I then was a missionary kid over in India. But poverty is the daily reality of many people in my community. So of some of my friends, my neighbours, my mums at the school gate, the pantry members, and also people I've done research with over the years. I'm going to read out now some of their descriptions of what poverty is like on the ground. I'm going to read them just to be faithful in particular to what they've said. I don't want to get this wrong. This is precious. So here we go. Poverty is more than being hungry or running out of money at the end of the week, although that does happen. It's the crippling daily worry about food and money. It's praying the washing machine doesn't break, that the sausages your toddler likes stay on offer at Aldi, or that your child doesn't grow a shoe size until your money comes in. It's compromising on your ethical standards, as you just can't afford fair trade or to buy meat that was reared in a sustainable way, even though you might like to. It's being unable to plan ahead, as you don't know your shift patterns for that week, or if you'll even be offered any hours. It's not having anything to fall back on in a crisis, going into debt with a high-cost lender to pay for that funeral. Or it's needing to sell something precious to cash converters, hoping you'll get it back in a few days. It's owing your neighbours money. Then they seemed friendly at first, but they turn nasty after a drink and the debts start adding up. Then needing to knock on that vicarage door to get cleaned up and borrow a couple more quid. It's sharing the food that you got at the food bank with your neighbours because you're worried about those lads in your block. They seem worse off than you. It's arriving into the country seeking asylum after a dangerous journey in the back of a van with your 2-year-old, only to find you must now navigate a system in a language you don't understand and spend months or even years relying on charities for food. It's being unable to just work from home during the pandemic. And even if you had a job that allowed you to do that, you might not have the space or the equipment to be able to. It was remaining on job seekers all this year because the libraries have been closed and you don't have a computer. It's having to take public transport, even when the guidance said avoid it. It's going on numerous courses put on by charities to improve your job opportunities, but finding people aren't always keen to employ someone with no work experience or a criminal record, or that you can't just make work pay once you've added up that cost of childcare and public transport. You're taking less money home than you're currently on your benefits. It's being more likely to die a decade before people who live in the posher parts of this city. It's being hostage to a system you can't control and isn't always easy to understand. You might get penalised for getting it wrong, as my friend Sylvia found. She didn't know she had to inform multiple departments of the Universal Credit team about the changes in her circumstances. She suddenly found she now owes hundreds of pounds back that she just doesn't have. As one mum put it to me, it's just constant anxiety of not being able to settle when you don't know what's around the corner. It's playing again and again with weighted dice. The story I put up on this slide is a particular one that opened my eyes this year and prompted me to respond. On the orange side, you'll see the story of Danny. That's actually my son, Donnie. So he's 2 years old, and this was during the earlier part of the pandemic, so I think September or so last year. He got a temperature and nursery obviously sent him straight home. 10 minutes later, I have a fast internet connection. I was easily able to book an appointment. We got a drive-through appointment for him to have a test within the hour. We spent one day waiting for the result, and his brother and our family were all isolating here in our lovely vicarage. After one day, we were back on with our lives. During that same week, my friend Natalie's son, Benji, got a temperature as well. He goes to the same nursery. Now, she doesn't have a car. She couldn't go to a drive-through appointment, which was actually across the water on Wirral. The nearest appointment she could get was 2 buses away. She's a single mum with 2 small kids who was meant to be isolating. So after battling with her internet, it took her quite a few hours. She managed to book a postal test. That came 2 days later, and 4 days after that, she got the result that he didn't have COVID. Natalie's older son is in the same year as mine. He missed that whole week of school. Mine had only missed 1 day. Natalie didn't have any outdoor space. She was cooped up inside with both her kids. Played out over various moments during this pandemic, Natalie's missed 3 or so, her son's missed 3 or so more weeks of schooling than my son, because I had the privilege of having a car. So sitting in the park one Sunday morning, as we do, Natalie and I decided this just wasn't right. We decided to write about it, which is what you're seeing on the screen. So we submitted a blog to Church Action on Poverty. And if you get a chance to read it, do. It shares Natalie putting some of this in her own words. After this, I suggested we meet our MP to talk about this together. We both live in the same place. Natalie was nervous, but she agreed. She felt, like I did, it was important to highlight this inequality. Our MP spent an hour with us. He listened to her story. He asked her loads more questions about what it was like to be a single mum during this pandemic. And she shared quite a lot about what it was like to have the vouchers over the summer holiday to use on food. She came away from this meeting buzzing, which wasn't what I'd expected. I'd been nervous about us going to it. She came away buzzing. She'd felt heard, and that her experiences had been of value to the MP. And they really had been of value to him, but also of me, to hear more about the reality of the pandemic. So what next after our moment of anger and our response? Well, a couple of months later, Natalie got a job as a cleaner. It was her first job in quite a few years. She got put on universal credit for the first time, and she had never heard of the 5-week wait before. Obviously, chatting with me, I'd heard about it and knew about it from various campaigns against the 5-week wait. So she agreed she'd spend time documenting what it would be like, in amongst, of course, receiving support from friends around her and ourselves at the church and our pantry to get through that time. It was over Christmas. At times this year, I've battled with my anger over the way the systems are designed to favour me over Natalie. I have a car. I have spare money to tide me over between my jobs. I'm not a single parent. My husband and I share parenting, and I'm able to afford extended childcare to get to and from work. I've been really eager to connect what I see at this hyper-local individual scale between me and Natalie with some of the policies and structures that have been emerging around us. But there's a tension there because Natalie's also my friend. I'm anxious that she doesn't in any way feel used by me or by my work. When a national paper in March this year asked us for stories to include about the impact of the pandemic on our community, Together Liverpool were happy to support them to speak to people. I asked Natalie if she wanted to be a part of it. She didn't feel ready and definitely didn't want to be photographed. But what's next for us is that together we've signed up for Church Action on Poverty's next Speaking Truth to Power cohort. We're really looking forward to this. We're on a journey navigating friendship, poverty, faith, life, and responding to the violence of poverty together from our different vantage points. The second example I want to share about one of the ways we've responded to some of this violence of poverty arises directly actually from the Life on the Breadline project. I attended their midterm conference. It was in Coventry. I think it must have been September 2019 because it was definitely before the pandemic. In it, after that day of listening to people who had experienced poverty themselves, but also academics in conversation with each other, we were asked very directly how we were going to respond to what we'd heard. Suddenly I was under pressure, needed to write down a concrete action. I suspect we might be put under that pressure again tomorrow at some point. So right there, we had to write down what we were going to do. So I did what I felt was in my hands. We had harvest service coming up at church, and usually I very much leave things over to my husband to be involved. I'm not someone who's often up at the front at church, but he agreed that we could shape the service around the End Hunger UK campaign and try and explore how we could connect our faith with our campaigning and the things that we were identifying as unjust happening in our community. After the service, which had people from the local community come along as well as people from our church, we went out to Everton Park, so that's the picture you can see on the screen, and we took part in the End Hunger UK photo shoot. So there are photos like this across the country as part of this national campaign. This photo shoot brought together some of our local councillors and our local politicians, but also just local community members who aren't anything to do with our church, but as well as church members. It felt rushed and unplanned, but we felt it was right to do something to support the national campaign. We ended up making a quick video on my iPhone during the gathering, which I thought I'd show you here, not just to give me a break from talking, but also so you can see some of the local people involved in this campaign.
I don't think any children should go to bed without dinner.
It's a disgrace and it's so sad that in a rich economy, a wealthy economy, we have children going to bed hungry and families wondering about how they're going to eat the next day.
We have children that have come to school hungry. It's 2019. We shouldn't have children coming to school worrying about that they haven't eaten rather than what they're going to be learning that day.
As chair of the Everton Labour Party, I see how bad austerity is around here, especially with universal credit. We're coming from a working class family in a working class area. I see how bad it's actually hitting the people of Everton.
The balance is just getting bigger and bigger, and it's just got to stop. The government have got to step in and do something because it's waste. You're watching babies and families struggling, terrible. People who go to work, people automatically think it's people who don't benefits and stuff who's doing this. It's happening too. It's most people I know come to our food bank at first year, and it's horrendous watching kids going hungry. It's just got to stop. It really has got to stop. It's heartbreaking more than anything else to watch it.
One of the first tasks of any society is to make sure that all its citizens are well fed. With the number of people we see living with food insecurity in the UK, it's something we're clearly failing at. It needs to become a priority again in our society to make sure that we end hunger, and we need the government to become part of that solution.
Please take a plan.
Yeah, if we're going to end hunger by 2030.
The End Hunger campaign is calling on the government to act now and set out a plan on how they're going to halve food insecurity by 2025 and end hunger in the UK by 2030, as they promised to do. Will you join your voice with ours and join our campaign? So during this moment of response, one of the things whilst watching that video, I'm reminded about the anger and passion in our community about the violence that austerity has caused to us. One of the things I also learned is that it was important to create the opportunity for people to come together and to express it. I hadn't planned to film people, but actually they were desperate to share why they were there, why they were supporting the campaign. So what next? After we did this, we had to in some ways trust that our local response would be used as part of the wider national campaign and that voices would be joined together. That's often the case with campaigning. You can't always see all the behind the scenes work that's going on to lobby politicians or how the national campaign knits together, but there's that moment of trust. But what it did for us was it brought new and kind of fostered new relationships between the Christians, the local community activists and the local politicians. And that work has been invaluable. During that campaign, I met some of those who are involved with Fans Supporting Food Banks, a grassroots movement that's really spread and developed across the UK and also nationally now. Started in Liverpool between Everton and Liverpool football clubs, collecting food for our food banks. When they were working on this new national campaign that's been galvanised over the last year called The Right to Food, they came to me and asked, could I get the Christians involved? Could the Christians help? So you can see a lovely shot of Bishop Paul, who's the Bishop of Liverpool. You might not thank me for that shot, but I was trying to get a good caption of it. We got Bishop Paul involved, and on the day that he was involved, they received thousands more signatures to their petition. So during that small moment back in life on the Breadline, when we were challenged to act, has led to all kinds of different relationships and our involvement with different campaigning. So I want to say thank you to the team for that prompt. Sometimes a direct call to action, even when it feels uncomfortable, is what we need. The third example, and the final example, I want to share with you about a moment of response to these intersections between austerity, poverty, and faith, is to tell you a little bit about how churches have been involved in the development of the Your Local Pantry franchise. It's the food pantries. So we're going to tell us about how both our church has been involved locally. We're one of a number of churches who are involved in Liverpool Diocese in food pantries, but also think a bit more about the national response as well. I could have done the whole talk about this, so if you're really interested in finding out more, do take a look at our latest report, so Dignity, Choice, Hope, that came out in February this year. But for those of you who aren't familiar with what a food pantry is, it's a weekly food club, so people come along at the same time at the same place each week. Members pay a small fee and take home about £20 worth of shopping. The food comes from both surplus food, so suppliers such as FareShare, but it's also brought in with the little amounts that people pay each week. So we reinvest it to buy wholesale lots of food in. We make sure we've always got fresh fruit and vegetables. One of the key things about the Your Local Pantry offer is that it's not just tins, not just jars, but there's always fresh fruit, vegetables. We also often have meat and dairy and vegetarian and vegan options in our chiller, in our fridge and freezer, which are actually at St George's, located within the church worship space themselves. So how did it start? The Your Local Pantry network evolved out of an observation by Stockport Homes. They're a housing association in Stockport. They had begun noticing that tenants were becoming overly reliant on food banks. And this isn't right. Food banks aren't designed for someone to get a parcel from them again and again. Nutritionally, they're not designed like that. We don't want people living off them. So Stockport Homes started 4 pantries for their tenants. And now the franchise has grown. They partnered with Church Action on Poverty, one of the partners on this Life on the Breadline research. And now the franchise has 50 pantries across the UK. Speaking with Church Action on Poverty recently, they reflected that half of these pantries, so 25 or so, have been started by Christians or in churches. That includes obviously St George's, where I'm at. Locally, our moment of response was when we moved here and we noticed that Everton is a food desert. So that means there isn't lots of places where people can shop, where they can buy affordable food and access fresh fruit and vegetables. There's also a lack of community spaces here. We've been hit by austerity, spaces have closed, and there just aren't many community buildings. The church is a large Grade 1 listed building at the centre of kind of 2 primary schools. It seemed like important to open up the church building and create what Al Barrett and Ruth Harley describe as bumping spaces. These are spaces where neighbours can connect with each other, gain a sense of belonging and contribute with their passions, gifts and skills. I was asked a couple of months ago now to pull together some national research about this movement of pantries. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we found. So what we found is that pantries are powerful community spaces which in a small way are pushing back against the violence of poverty and the crushing forces of austerity. They have obvious financial benefits. So if someone comes to a pantry each week, they could save approximately £780 over the course of the year, a massive amount. We surveyed nearly 500 of the members and they spoke about how it eases pressures on their finances. They talked about the things they'd use the money that they'd saved through being a member on. They talked about paying off debts or other bills, being able to save. We did our survey just before Christmas, so people spoke about saving in particular for Christmas, but also people spoke about being able to buy more or better quality food. or treat items such as sending their sons on swimming lessons, things that they weren't able to afford otherwise. Pantries are also pushing back on some of the health inequalities that are built into our society's structures and systems. So members told us about how they're feeling less anxious now about money and food. So 76% of those we surveyed said it had been good for their mental health. We also noticed a lot of improvements, reported improvements about physical health. It's just something as simple as having a community space to walk to, a routine to get into each week, somewhere to go. There was also the double whammy of having more spare cash that you can spend on buying more fresh fruit and veg, but also the fresh fruit and veg you're getting at the pantry meant that lots of members, their diets had changed and they were able to eat more healthily. We also noticed that pantries are playing a role in strengthening local communities. So these bumping spaces I mentioned, they're also strengthening local economies, with some of the pantries choosing to reinvest their money specifically in local suppliers. But there's a couple of other aspects I want to highlight about pantries as together we explore those main themes of life on the breadline. And the question of, if austerity kills, can the church's response give life? So one thing specific about this type of franchise, this Your Local Pantry franchise, is that all of the volunteers are encouraged to also be members. So I'm a volunteer, but I'm also a member of my pantry. Often if a pantry sets up in a church, at the start, the volunteers will mainly come from the church community. But very, very early on, we're encouraged to expand that out to anybody who's a member who wants to get involved in volunteering, recognising we all have gifts and skills to bring. Our members and our volunteers are the people who shape the way the pantry looks. So at our local pantry, our members started a book swap recently. We now have a massive table of books and they bring them and take them back each week. You can see from some of those quotes from some of the members that we interviewed, there's a pantry is a place that you're proud to be a part of, somewhere where you feel you have there's dignity when you walk in, you're able to choose your food. It's not somewhere where you're ashamed or where there's a stigma about being a part of. Obviously, they're a work in progress, but we hope over time that pantries can also become spaces where members can collectively identify and galvanise around issues that they are seeing impacting their daily lives. There's a power in this more national kind of approach, this national franchise, as hopefully as things develop, it's still in its early days, but as a national network, there's a potential for the members to be able to come together to speak about changes and shape local communities, but also have a national voice. I see them as a significant shift from the church doing to towards the church doing with, but hopefully also beyond that, something Al Barrett and Ruth Harley talk about in their book, a shift towards going beyond doing with to being able to being interrupted, shaped and redirected and challenged by those you're living alongside. It's early days, we've not always got it right, but the final thing I want to share about pantries as a Christian response to poverty and austerity is that God is at work in these spaces. This is obvious in a few ways. It is obvious in the ways that the church loves to count, but also ways the church longs for. So that might be through, we have seen people come along to our carol services, our Easter services, come back to attending church regularly when maybe they hadn't for a while. We have some of our members, well, one of our members who's now a volunteer, she's wanting to get baptised and we're hoping to arrange a start course as some of her preparation for that. And speaking with Adam, my husband, who's the vicar there, he talked about how an unexpected thing for the church was actually pantry members have wanted to give to the church. So not just pay their fee for being a part of the pantry, but give to the work of the church. And each week about £20 is left on the giving plate. This was never an intention. But also what I'm very keen to stress is that God is at work in the space itself. It's become a space that I think is laden with goodness and kindness, where everybody's able to enjoy food which is, as we saw Bishop Paul say earlier, a gift from God. instead of being something that we're always worrying about. And also this idea that everyone has a unique skill to bring, and everyone's skills are welcome and can be a part of it. I'd like to go as far as to say that for me, being a part of the pantry is a foretaste of God's kingdom. It's pointing towards an alternative to the systems that entrap and create and perpetuate some of the injustices and violences of poverty we've been talking about today. I see it in moments when members such as Jimmy, who works at a local home and bargain, so it's a local discount store, he gets his staff credit, which he used to spend on himself, but now he spends to buy toiletries for our pantry members. When another member, Sophie, was pregnant, we saw neighbours who she didn't know before she'd met them in that space, bringing baby clothes for her baby. And then a particular member I want to tell you about is Joe. It was Good Friday. We have our pantry on a Friday morning. On Good Friday, the church was about to be changed from being a pantry to being a prayer space for Good Friday. As he saw it changing, he said, "Oh, I see you've got a service on Easter Sunday outside." And it was kind of our first moment of regathering the church. And he said, "How can I help? How can I serve your church?" And there he was on the Sunday morning, doing hand sanitizer to church community members who didn't know him at all, but it's wonderful to connect those two spaces. But his kind of servant-heartedness is a moment of God at work through us all. As I said, we're on a journey with this, but what I wanted to highlight was that this has stemmed from a moment of response that Stockport Homes, they responded, didn't they, to noticing that there was a problem, that their tenants were going again and again to the food banks. There's also been other moments throughout this journey of your local pantry, countless moments where individuals, churches, community groups, other groups of other faith have said, yes, we will respond in this way and we will set something up like this. It's done the things to address in a small way some of the issues around food and money, but what it's also done is create community spaces, godly spaces, where people's emotional and spiritual well-being is also being nurtured. So to finish, I hope sharing these three slightly different responses that are kind of, and a little bit about the entangled way that our responses operate at different scales. So talking about one-to-one individual scales, community scales, and then this more national franchise. Hope sharing with that has been helpful, maybe stimulated some of your thinking as you think about how you can respond to life on the breadline. Got this question on the screen: what could the next steps look like for you? Are you someone who needs to spend time getting to know and sharing life with those for whom life on the breadline is a reality? Do we also need to spend time listening and understanding those we're trying to communicate to? So maybe some of the decision makers and kind of local people in power that we're trying to influence. We need to find the right language to communicate with them. I put up a couple of resources and kind of links to various websites on the screen. And in particular, the Life on the Breadline resources, I think, is a great first place to start if you're thinking how you can respond. I urge you to explore, listen, reflect on your own positionality and learn, but also not to stop there. That's why I put that picture of Zacchaeus from the Bible on the screen. Zacchaeus was a man who was confronted with his sin and his complicity in the structures of power and money, but then he took action to change that. So yes, wrestle with the question of what next. Yes, listen and learn from the examples you're hearing today, the examples you'll hear in the kind of weeks and months ahead, but don't let your response to life on the breadline stop there. Let it lead you into action. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Naomi. So much to think about from that, and that was really great to hear lots of different examples and experiences that you've shared. So thank you. We're now going to have about 10 minutes for a time of some questions. So I'm sure people will have lots of questions because there's lots to think about from that.
Yeah, on the difference between churches kind of coming in and saying we know this is what the community needs, and therefore we're going to put this on. I think is an approach we try and encourage people Together Liverpool not to take. We encourage instead a more assets-based approach that listens to your local community, brings people together, works out what is it that your community needs from your church, what assets do the church have. Often that's a building, might be volunteers, it might be someone with a particular passion and some time, but listening to what's needed.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got questions flooding in now about pantries. A couple of practical questions. We've got one question: what do churches need to start a pantry?
What I can say from our experience, we were a church who'd had a painful interregnum. We didn't have loads of things going on in our church when we came along. It obviously had a great history of being involved in social action, but it had a painful year. So we're not a church with loads of resources financially. We're a church of about 50 or 60 or so people. So when it came to starting a pantry, the best thing we did was partner with a larger local organisation, which are called St Andrew's Community Network, who supported us to get in food and get a stable food supply for the pantry. And they also oversee our money. So it meant we haven't had to handle more of the finances. Now, the way St Andrews have done that is by joining the Your Local Pantry franchise, which is kind of like a business in a box. That has been so right for our church and our community, because it's meant that we needed to get the volunteers together. We needed to go and do coffee mornings in our local schools and meet our kind of local children's centre and tell them about the pantry, but we didn't have to worry about where we were going to get all the food from. So I think a top tip is partner with others who it's their area of expertise, and let your church do what it's probably great at already, which is welcoming, hospitality, building relationships, getting to know people.
A question on food banks and pantries. How would you say the pantry differs from a food bank?
Yeah, that's a great question. As a city, so I lead Feeding Liverpool, the city's food alliance. What we're trying to do is to put a food bank back to emergency use only. So when someone's in a crisis, they get referred by a support agency to get that 3-day parcel of food, but not something where they're to live off it long term. And then we want to have this layer of community food provision, different ways communities can celebrate food. Our pantry is one of them. Another one might be hosting community meals. There's all kinds of different ways. So pantry is different from a food bank in that it's somewhere we want people to attend regularly. It's different in that you pay a small membership fee. There isn't any income criteria, so no one at the door is saying, have you got a referral? Has an agency sent you here? Instead, all we're asking is, are you a member of the local community? Great, come and join this together. But the systems do work together in some ways. We have people coming along to our local food bank who will then be signposted to our pantry as something alongside the other wraparound care they'll need for the reason why they're at the food bank in the first place. We do some of that signposting at the pantry. If someone comes to us, we have a money advisor, debt advisor. We would send people to the city council for support as well. Similarly, if someone comes to a pantry and is in a crisis, our response might be that actually they need a food bank voucher, and we need to be getting a referral agency that can offer them wraparound care and support. So the systems work together but are different.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
There's a bit more about that in the Dignity Choice Hope report. The first page has some more about the differences.
Brilliant, thank you. This next question has 2 parts to it. The first part is, it's kind of a statement and a question in one. So food pantries rely on corporate food surplus model via fair share. So if so, is there a risk of sacralising food pantries when their operation model is dependent on and rely on an exploitative capitalist food system?
Don't know what the word sacralising is, but I will still give it a go. The pantries do get surplus food from fair share. They will also reinvest that the amount that people pay as well. And at the moment, we're not a fully self-sufficient model here in Liverpool. So there is also some charity funding going into starting up these pantries and keeping them afloat. We're only about 18 months into our journey of pantries in Liverpool. So is there a risk of sacralising food pantries when their operation model is dependent on and rely on exploitative capital food systems? I think if you can tell me a bit more about the risk of sacralising, that would probably help me out here. But one place I would signpost people to have a look at is the This Is Rubbish campaign, and their campaign around food abundance and equality. And that does give a good explanation about some of the arguments around food waste and also poverty and the links between the two. And definitely we want to reduce the amount of surplus food that's available. We want to reduce the food waste system, but also we want to create spaces, those bumping spaces where people in communities can meet, and food is something that's amazing to meet around. So if surplus food wasn't available and that wasn't the model, I would still want a pantry type initiative to exist as a space where communities can galvanise around, get to know each other, share what they're seeing on the ground and respond together to that.
Thank you. I'm going to squeeze in one last question. I think we've got sort of 30 seconds, but this is a really good question to finish on. The question is, of the 3 different types of Christian response you outlined, so individual, accompaniment, and then campaigning and service provision, which would you say has generated the most change for you and for your local community?
I think I presented them as separate, but actually they're also entwined. So Natalie, who I spoke about at the beginning, is also a member of the pantry, as is someone called Sylvia, who I mentioned earlier. So I think the systems go well together. Create those community spaces, invest in relationships, genuine listening relationships where you get to know people, and then the campaigning can spur out of that. It should spur from people who are experiencing different kinds of inequality rather than from our pre-existing ideas of what a campaign should be about.
Thank you. Well, I'm sure everyone will join me in saying thank you again, Naomi. That was a really great talk, and thank you for joining us this afternoon.